Welcome, all of you, friends of Northern, and also some of our partners are in the audience today. I hope that when I'm finished and when you leave this conference today, you're convinced about the following. I mean, the title, Finance and Energy is Crucial for Poverty Alleviation. Probably nothing is more important. And my intervention is basically trying to convince you that that is the fact by telling a story about Norway, about Bangladesh, and about what Northern is doing. And hope that be able to convince you that the question going forward is really not if it's developmental, it's how can we do more. Let's sort of, to set the scene, start with a bit of a puzzle. I mean, why is it so difficult to understand how important it is to us in 2014? Our forefathers so easily did get the point. This report was issued this summer by an organization called Eurodad in Brussels. It's an umbrella organization for more than 50 big NGOs in Europe, and it basically questions us and other DFIs why we invest in financial services. Let's move 190 years back. In 1822, the first Sparebank, the first saving association, was established in Oslo. And I'm sorry for you English speaking, I have to do this in Norwegian because the citing in Old Norwegian is so cute. The founding partners basically said the following. The reason why it was important to establish Christiania was then the name of Oslo. This was Oslo 1822. They wanted to establish Christiania Sparebank så at den mindre formuende kan have noe å tage til ved at begynne en næringsvei. Inntrede i ekteskap på nødens dag eller i den besværlige alderdom. Ingen var i tvil om at dette var utviklingsfremmede og til fordel for de fattige. Tilsvarende på energi. En av våre, Arild Hermestad i Fremtiden i våre hender, sa for noen år siden i et intervju i Dagsavisen at large-scale hydropower to the grid does not reduce poverty in the less developed countries. Couldn't be more wrong. Reidar Carlsen was an MP in the Norwegian Parliament just after the Second World War. He comes from Troms, one of the most northern part of Norway. In a debate in the parliament, he said that providing electricity is more important than developing the railroad or building roads. Yes, it's actually more important than just anything except providing houses for people without housing. And in the northern part of Norway in 1947, that was a big problem because after the war, large part of the particularly Finnmark, the most northern part, was burned down by the Germans. So the point is, I mean, it was so obvious back in Norwegian history, and it's so obvious today for poor people in poor countries how important finance and energy is. It's important that we get the message. Let's two overheads to sort of shortly explain you the history of the Norwegian saving association Sparebankene. And then think about Bangladesh. You will hear more about Bangladesh later. You will hear about Cambodia, one of our investment also later. Think about poor countries today, but this is Norway. The saving association was all about sort of the keywords that we use today when we invest in microfinance and banks, providing fairly basic financial services to the unbanked. That was basically what they did. The saving associations were the only one provided services to poor people in the mid-19th century, and providing credit for small and medium-sized enterprises and agriculture. It was also a lot about long fingers. So the Oslo Sparebank, when it started the first few years, only had an office hour on Saturday afternoon to try to convince workers coming out of the factories, instead of going to a bar, going to a saving association and provide finance for a family going forward. So it was a lot about long fingers and life improvement and life betterment for poor people. Three illustrations from my part of the country. In 1839, Egersund Sparebank was founded. A few people came together, was able to provide 224 crowns. That was the capital. What was that for? Well, in this part of the country, it was much about herring fisheries, salteries, and export of fish. And these small businesses needed credit to grow. So that's why they established a bank, Egersund Sparebank. 1852, same part, southwest of Norway, not far from where I came from, in Finnøy this time. They established the first saving association to provide credit for farmers, because at that point in time technology was developing, dairy was an issue, but also more expensive capital equipment to do farming. So they needed a saving association and created one. Or lately, Sandherred Sparebank, 1913. Well, actually, it was founded earlier, but in 1913 it bought the waterfall rights for Himsfossen, which was later provided as a gift for the local government to develop electricity and start electrification. And they were so convinced, in all of these cases, why it was important for poverty evaluation. And the last one on sort of gives a bridge over to electricity and Norwegian history in terms of harnessing the hydropower potential. This is the first hydropower station to serve Oslo, 1900. The next in 1903, even bigger in Glomma. And then we started developing the bigger thing on the west coast of Norway, which in some cases were some very impressive engineering undertaking by that time. It was really sort of the backbone on development. Then at some point in time we discovered that, well, maybe it's enough. Maybe it's time to start to think it over again. Maybe we should preserve some of the waterfalls left. But that was 100 years later. And we sometimes confuse it with the stories that we are involved with. SM Power, I mean, this is really the SM Power story. La Higuera in Chile, similar developments that I showed 1 century before for Norway. This is development, this is really the backbone of development in these countries, and it's renewable. But back to Norway. The electricity was really what powered industrialization of the country. Large scale, we were able to produce electricity in big scale at a fairly decent price, so that was the backbone on the manufacturing industries. And big cities like this grew up around some of the big waterfalls. But it was not only about industry. It was also very much about households. In the beginning, it was all about lighting, later cooking, and then sort of the real modern thing in the late 30s, kitchen stoves with an oven. And I'll show you some interesting sort of ads at this time from this period of time. This is modern. This is really the gigantic step forward for young women. You know, not only that, I mean, the lady here is Miss Nygaardsvold, the Prime Minister's wife. Even she volunteered to promote ovens that, I mean, the modern fashion. So this was about the modern Norway growing, coming into being. So to close this energy part of it, look at this graph. And look at the graph of Finnmark. This is the number of people, the share of population with access to electricity, hooked up to the grid. This is about electrification. This is about building the grid. Well, let me, for a short digression to Mozambique. Mozambique has 20% of the people have access to electricity. Their electrification program has been extremely successful over the last 5 to 10 years. So successful that the problem is they're not able to generate enough electricity, they're not able to build enough generating capacity and to upgrade the transmission system. But this number is growing. Look at the number. I mean, Finnmark in 1945 was less than 20%, less than Mozambique. And it actually went down significantly due to the war, because of the war. And then this citation again from the same MP, Reidar Karlsen, in a radio interview. Coming from this part, the northern part of the country, and he said that a significant share of the 600,000 people still relying on kerosene lamps live in the northern part of Norway. And if you asked him, do we need a study to convince us that electrification is good for these people, he would ask the guys to be mentally examined. This was on top of the agenda, and nobody would question it. And you could see how progress moved through the northern part of Norway. Take also a note of Bangladesh, 60%. Bangladesh is a poor country, 160 million, 60% access to electricity, which is a very remarkable story. But it goes beyond that. The story about Bangladesh is very much about inclusive growth, surprisingly enough. Before we start with Bangladesh, I mean, the reason I started to be interested in Bangladesh was after reading this book by the Nobel laureate amateur Amartya Sen and Jean Dres earlier this year. It's a book about India. It's a fairly critical and pessimistic book about India, and particular for not being able to generate inclusive growth. Listen to the following numbers. In India, 43% of kids below 5 years are undernourished. 43%. And then compare. Sub-Saharan Africa, the similar number is 20. Africa, now in China, it's 4. So this is not, and my good friend Deepak Malik, who will hear later today, he was a bit concerned when he saw a draft of this presentation. I mean, being too negative and pessimistic about India, and the point is not talking India down, it's about talking Bangladesh up. And also the last election in India, where India for the first time elected a prime minister outside the small elite who's been running the country for so long, promised better for the future, like the last election in Indonesia, electing Joko Widodo, also outside the establishment, and perhaps both cases, at least what we can hope for, is that we will see development going forward similar to what happened after Lula was elected in Brazil. But the point, in this case, the story about or the comparison between India and Bangladesh is really to explain to you the rather remarkable history about Bangladesh. It's still one of the poorest countries in the world, but it had 25 years of rapid and inclusive growth, and increasing growth. Look at the trend. Look at also, I marked some of the big cyclones with tens or thousands of people dead. Doesn't seem to much affect the growth path or development, but it's definitely a tragedy for those who are affected. 25 years of improving life expectancy, maternal health, child mortality, school enrollment, gender parity, and not to forget women's economic participation. So how is this possible? I think there's basically 4 arguments. Perhaps the most important is the textile and garment industry. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's remittance from Bangladeshi outside sending money back home, like in Africa. It's the microfinance industry. Finance, perhaps the most successful microfinance industry in the world. And it's about government being modestly successful in providing important infrastructure, in particular electricity. But let's start with some of the numbers, and I'll come back to sort of the four explanatory reasons why this is the case. This is GDP per capita, and you see, well, on one hand, Bangladesh today is 50% better off than Mozambique and Rwanda, but still half India, and then China, sort of India multiplied by 3. Growth in GDP per capita has been higher in India than in Bangladesh, and the level now is twice the Bangladeshi number. Human Development Index from UNDP tries to sort of encompass what is, human development in a broad sense. Bangladesh close to, but still lagging, but growing at the same pace as India, though growing GDP per capita wise lower at a lower level. But it's much better off than Mozambique, of course. Share of population living in absolute poverty, it's still 40% in Bangladesh, so it's still a dirt poor country, but it's definitely going the right way. And in parallel with India. And then some even more striking numbers. Life expectancy better than India, 5 years behind China, and Bangladeshi live 20 years longer than a Mozambican. But growing. Under 5 years old mortality rate. Now Bangladesh starts to score better than India, despite the difference in income, and dramatic change over 25 years, dramatic improvement. And similar with maternal mortality ratio. Slightly better than India, and continuous improvement over 2.5 decades. And you see how dangerous it is for mothers to be poor, to live up in poor countries. Mozambique. So now to the sort of explanatory factors. And start with the garment industry. We all saw this picture, the one to the left, from the Rana Plaza building, who collapsed in April of last year. 1,100 people killed, 2,000 injured. No doubt that in this country, working conditions are poor, health and safety standards are not enforced, even more building codes, which is basically the big accident, and trade unions are struggling to be able to provide support for the workers in the garment industry. Though, if you look, and because this is how it looks like from what happened. This is our perception. This is how it looks like from top of the world and from the news picture, and that's true. But in Bangladesh, this is even truer. Despite low pay, poor working condition, in the garment factories, what has happened over the last 2-3 decades is really empowerment of millions of Bangladeshi women. The graph shows the number of employees in the garment industry, 4 million, 90% of which are women. And then who are they? The lady in the middle is a lady called Mukta Mullah. She's one of 350 workers in a factory called Beauty Garments in Dhaka. She earned $20 a day, working 8 hours a day, at least 6 days a week. But in her own mind, she has been granted independence and a social freedom that is completely unknown for her female peers in the countryside, in this dominantly Muslim country where she comes from. Countryside, young girls being married away, start having kids in their late teens, and toil away in doing agricultural work and providing food for the family. Mullah is able to send back home 50% of the salary, and she sometimes go back and visit the family. And this is what she said in an interview in a newspaper. For them, that's the rural girls that she meet. It's a cage. My life is much better than theirs because they have no freedom. When I go back to my village and see my friends, they ask me, "Can you take me with you?" But still, I mean, all the bad things that we read and hear, I mean, low standards, hard work, I mean, all of that is right. But for her, the alternative is the life of the women to the left. How is this possible, growing this garment industry in Bangladesh? Well, it's a long story, and it's a story about trade policy being important. Goes back to Richard Nixon, who is 1973 initiated international negotiation that ended up in the multi-fiber agreement. Multi-fiber agreement was basically a trade policy put in place to protect U.S. garment and textile workers. It ended up with a detailed set of quotas: how many bras, how many T-shirts, whatever are you allowed to are China allowed to export to U.S. and to Europe. We had the same in Norway. We had quotas for different countries. Each particular article. Then what happened was that South Korea was the big problem for U.S. They easily hit the target. Their export were curtailed. At this point in time, South Korea was the big winner in the textile and garment industry internationally. So South Korean producer, they started to migrate to Bangladesh because Bangladesh had quotas for export that nobody thought would ever be used. So that's why it was granted in the first place when they negotiated a multi-fiber agreement. Let's keep down those who can compete with us, and then give away some free to the other ones who's not able to. Though that proved to be wrong in terms of Bangladesh. So gradually, this industry started to grow in the late 80s and particularly in the 90s. And today, it's 90% of export value from Bangladesh. It's about low pay. I mean, look at the graph to the right. Average $68 per month in Bangladesh, lowest but it's still low in the region. Reason why Bangladesh succeeds is hard work and low pay that make them compatible international. We see, going back to Henry Bernard, we see the same thing, hopefully, starting to happen in Africa. And Ethiopia is the first. Bit of textile, bit of shoe industry being relocated from Asia to Ethiopia. So that was the garment industry, providing millions of jobs to poor girls from the countryside. Another important factor in Africa, as Henry Bernard alluded to, as in Bangladesh, remittance from workers abroad, exploding over the last 10 years. And very important with this kind of revenues is also the fact that most of it ends up in the countryside. Poor people. So that's why they can buy a TV set or a bicycle or have a fixed roof. Remittance from relatives abroad. I mentioned microfinance, and microfinance in Bangladesh is all about Grameen and it's about BRAC. Norway has been invested in BRAC, so I'll talk a little bit about BRAC. BRAC is the biggest NGO in the world, 120,000 employees with 135 million clients in a country with 160 million people. BRAC is about microfinance. It's about health clinics, education, maternal health. I mean, there's a whole variety of services that in our part of the world will be provided by the government, in Bangladesh provided by Grameenphone and others. And they have, in fact, a bank, BRAC Bank, which is the fourth largest SME bank globally, extremely impressively operated when you meet with them. We have in the past provided funding for BRAC microfinance. At the present for BRAC Bank, we would like to do more. This is really sort of the Norwegian Saving Association story in scale. I think also where BRAC and Grameen is impressive is the fact that they've been able to scale, to take microfinance to scale. Not only doing more than microfinance, but the microfinance is at scale. So for that reason, they're able to take down cost. A lot of the challenge we have in microfinance is that cost is too high. That was the case in the Norwegian Saving Associations too. We had 600 in 1940, and a fewer now. So BRAC and microfinance is very much a part of this inclusive growth story. Then about electricity. Electricity in Bangladesh is about natural gas and gas-fired power. Gas was discovered in Bangladesh in fact in the mid-60s. They started to develop it in the 80s due to the fact that a significant amount of this gas was made available at low cost or free to the government. That gas was used to provide electricity, so domestic resources to produce electricity that was passed on to consumers at a fairly low rate. I mean, very similar to the Norwegian history about hydropower and electrification. So electricity is definitely part of the story. Also, also the government has been modestly successful in providing roads in the countryside, which is extremely important again for poverty alleviation. But then back to sort of this comparative sort of game that I've been playing, sort of Norway and Bangladesh. And in fact, I mean, there's not much in common. You have to be extremely, there's not really much at all in common, except for these two factors. Both countries succeeded at a fairly early point in time to provide basic financial services and electricity, to use domestic resources to produce electricity at low rate for the people. That's the reason why the cheap electricity from gas-fired power stations, that's why they have 60% electrification in the country. That's part of the reason why women are better positioned than in most other places. So to close on sort of my opening speech, sort of what's the purpose of what I'm saying today? I mean, it's basically lessons learned. If development and poverty alleviation is what we're after, then it's difficult to find a safer bet in investing in energy and finance. We don't need to write up all this report. If we're able to provide basic finance and energy electrification in poor parts of the world, it's extremely difficult to get it wrong. So the last part about Norfund, what we've been up to over the last few years, last year, since the last summer conference, we committed 1.8 billion last year. This year, there's still big uncertainty between 1.5 and 2.5. We have some big deals that may or may not arrive. We believe at the present we basically have a deal source and an organization able to invest between 2 and 2.5 billion with high quality, and we could scale that up. One of the big things last year was breakthrough for solar power in Africa, and also starting on wind in Kenya. And you will see more of both. We will tomorrow, and keep this between us, but we will tomorrow sign a deal with Scatec Solar to set up a joint company to roll out solar in Africa and in countries where we are present at large scale. We think we can do it. We think we can do something similar to what we did in the past in the hydropower area. And we also believe that a win will happen, but not in the same scale. We concluded after a long and complicated process, a restructuring SM Power Guatemala portfolio. And this is all about hydropower, and to us it's all about taking the competence and skills to poorer parts of the world. And that's what we agreed with Statkraft and BKK this spring and to do. Set up a new SM Power / Aguamara, hopefully merge it to one company by later this year, to do Central America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, and scale that up. Complicated, challenging, poor parts of the world with rapidly growing economy that desperately need the power. And then we agreed that part of the portfolio in Chile, Peru, Brazil, India, and Nepal to be merged into a Statkraft entity. We will still have an equity stake in it and still have be a partner in that part of the portfolio, but gradually move capital and competence and skills to poorer parts of the world. That's what Africa needs. We closed a deal with KLP, Perestroika, Skagen Kontiki, and the Stensrud family from the Skagen Fund to set up a company that we managed to invest $140 million US in banks in Africa. Building on Northern track record, we have convinced these people that we're able to do it. We have been able to do it. We injected 2 of our investment to the company, DFCU and Sucremo in Mozambique, DFCU in Uganda. We believe this is an attractive proposition for Norwegian investors, and these are the guys who are willing to move first. Important step forward for us. Then about sort of the other end of the portfolio, the bank part is sort of where we believe that there is a risk-return equation that is attractive for commercial investors. Now we're in fragile states. We still haven't given up being able to develop a hydropower in South Sudan. If they stop fighting, we will take it forward. I mean, and we're ready to do so. We did a first investment in a bank in Zimbabwe. Not many people are willing to do so. It's a challenging one for many reasons, also governance. With Africa Century Food, the partners are here in the audience somewhere. We're investing in fish farming in Zimbabwe, tilapia, for the local and regional markets. And we did our first investment in a microfinance institution in Myanmar. In South Sudan and in Myanmar, there's nobody else. We are the only one. We're the only DFI willing to do so. So trying to take our sort of commercial instruments and way of working to the poorest part of the world and be the first mover, that's a DFI mandate the way we interpret it. Last slide to illustrate sort of the impact of what we do. 340,000 people are employed well, it's very important. We don't say that we're responsible for it. We don't say that we created it. But it's the people employed in companies that we are invested in, directly or indirectly, have a greater or smaller stake. 37% of these are female. We deliver electricity to 9 million people, and we have 53 million borrowers in our financial institutions. It's scale, and it's definitely possible to scale it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kjell. And I was very happy about, you had some parallels to Finnmark, where I'm from myself, and I can assure you I didn't grow up with kerosene lamps. And I'm also very happy that I'm not in the kitchen cooking on those electric stoves, but I'm here instead.